Hello, everybody. Welcome to November. Can't believe it's November already. Third Tuesday conversation for November 2016, or 2016, excuse me. My name is Danica Olson, and I am your host. Glad to have you with us. Today we have the extreme privilege of chatting with Sharon and Tim Taylor, who are pastors in North Carolina. And in 1 second, I'll have them tell us a little bit about themselves and what they're up to in North Carolina. But before we jump in, I want to say that if you haven't joined us before, this is meant to be an interactive conversation over coffee. And so please submit your questions and comments into the box on the right-hand side of your screen where it says questions, and we'll pass those on a little later in the broadcast. But also, we would love if you would join in and live tweet this conversation, things that are helpful to you, things that are interesting or challenging to you by using the hashtag 3TC. So welcome, Sharon and Tim. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. We're glad to be here.
Perfect. Well, like I said, we would love to have you just tell a little bit about who you are. You obviously are, there's an and in the middle of your names, and you have the same last name, so you're married.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, go ahead and tell us a little bit about what we might want to know about your family or your ministry there in North Carolina.
Oh, okay. We've been married for 31 years, working on 32, and we have two little dogs, a Bichon and a Maltese. Those are our children. They're 13 and 14. We've been doing, I've probably been doing youth ministry for almost 45 years. I used to think that it was, I was old when the kids told me something and I knew their birth date. Now, when the kids tell me something and I know their parents' birth date, that's how I realize how long I've been doing youth ministry. Sharon and I have been doing this workshop or a reasonable facsimile thereof for probably most of our married life. We started doing it when we started dating. I'm currently serving in a small redevelopment congregation called the Lutheran Church of the Abiding Savior in Durham, North Carolina, and I just started in May. It's a redevelopment congregation.
Okay.
And I'm Sharon, and I'm serving as senior pastor at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Raleigh, and we are in University City kind of neighborhood. We have an active Lutheran campus ministry. We're a block from NC State and a half mile from Meredith College. So we have a lot of exciting things going on there. I've been ordained 18 years. Second career was a social worker before going to seminary. And as Tim said, we've been doing this for a long time. And our workshop, we developed the workshop and have changed it over the years, but we've done it for groups as small as 10 and as large as 600. Wow. We've done it for synod groups, congregational groups, at the national gathering several times, and we've also done it in school systems in New Jersey and Pennsylvania.
And for the federal government. I did some for the IRS up in New York when we lived in Pennsylvania.
Wow, cool. I didn't know that. Well,
and I just actually last week I was out in Nebraska with the Lutheran Outdoor Ministries is meeting, and they had a leadership training event, and I flew out to do this workshop for our Lutheran Outdoor Ministries. So we're trying to get this in all areas of the church so that we can make sure that we're starting to pay attention to what's going on.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. I first learned of the two of you. I attended a workshop at the Extravaganza somewhere in the middle or early 2000s, so it's been quite some time. But it was a really formative and transformative experience for me, and as we've discussed, I've used it several times with groups of kids, and it just, the things that you offer as tools to open conversation of this nature is just, it's phenomenal. So we're delighted to have you with the network once again, and are excited about the conversation that we'll be having today. So as a place to begin, it was in the literature that came out as the advertisement of this that, we talk about it, that we're having a conversation on racism, but it's really about ism in general.
Right.
And there are lots of them in our world that are alive and well, unfortunately. And so I think we discussed that much of your workshop is experiential. So let's maybe paint a visual picture of what does that look like? How do you help people enter into this conversation so that a real conversation happens and not just sound bites and things of that nature?
Okay.
So we always start our workshop with a verbal activity, a simulation of sorts, and we call it the label game. And sometimes we've called our workshop, Does Reading the Label Really Help? And basically what happens is we use mailing labels, simple mailing labels. We put folks into a big circle. It's nonverbal, so their only instructions are when we place this label on your forehead, you will be able to see what everyone else's label instructs you to do, but you can't see what's on your forehead. And then we ask them as moderators, we ask them to mingle non-verbally, and their only instruction is to do what each person's label tells them to do. And some labels are perceived as positive, so some labels may say, smile at me, shake my hand, pat me on the back, and then there's some that are often perceived as negative, so it may say, look angry at me, frown at me, turn your back on me. We have one, yeah, we have one that says hit me. And we usually now, over the years, we've added at least one blank label, which is always interesting. So they go through this process and we don't allow them to stop. So even though they quickly start to size up what their label at least feels like to them, we make them keep going. It's really, we've done this thing hundreds of times, and I learn something new every single time we do it because the different group of people, the different perceptions, we always process it afterwards. We ask them, you know, how many people think your label was something negative, how many people think something positive, and then we talk about the group process, like as you are watching each other, what happened. So sometimes you'll see that the people with the hit me labels start to move out to the outside of the circle because they don't want to be hit anymore. Or folks, when they get to the blank label, don't know what to do. It's amazing how when we don't have instruction or we don't have a category or a label for another person, we often choose to do something negative instead of something positive. So we always begin with that, which is we've just found such a great way to put it on an experiential level and also to provide a lot of aha moments. So rather than talking at someone about an issue of isms, we're actually kind of experiencing it in some way.
Right, and we talk about where, you know, where in our society do these labels come from? And, you know, not that people necessarily walk around necessarily with a label on their forehead, but the way we perceive one another can be seen as looking at a person's label. And then how do we also live into those labels where we understand what our label is from others, so how do we then sometimes live into that label?
Well, and fascinating that, like I mentioned, we just did this with our group of teenagers the week before the election, and getting them to name the particular labels that either they feel they have placed on them or that they have placed on others, but then their acute awareness of the fact that we really don't get to choose our own labels, just as in the exercise, that you have nothing to say about what's on your forehead.
Right.
And how that feels as, you know, as you go through the exercise. But then also their awareness of like, I got to take this label off at the end of the exercise. Fascinating.
And it's actually sometimes fascinating for me to watch how quickly those with the negative labels take them off, and some with the positive labels actually put them back on, and I've seen them wear their label for the rest of the day or the rest of the event.
Interesting. If that's the picture you wanted to paint, I wonder if we can jump to the next piece. This is our friend Tim. Tell us a little bit about this picture.
Okay, this is what we've started to use as we deal with the issue of white privilege. And we've added not only white privilege but dominant culture privilege to it, because the default, as you can see in that picture, the color of those items is nude.
Or flesh.
Or flesh. So when we move to, well, just prior to this, we play a song by Jewel. It's called "Pieces of You."
Yeah.
And it has some if you haven't had a chance to hear that, I would suggest that you download Jewel's "Pieces of You" if you're going to use it for a workshop like this, because it really is the way the music flows, and then the words that come up are really kind of striking and can really add to conversation. So then when we move into this, we're talking about how people of color in America really have to think about the things that we do and the things that we say and the places that we go and the things that are available to us. And when we use the term white privilege, this is an example of the fact that white America does not have to think about such things. You can go in the store and pick up an item and, like the Band-Aid, like the nasal strips, and without having to think about, is it going to stand out as much? Is it something that's designed for me and about me? So we talk about the fact that the default in the United States is white.
Yeah.
And how we have to begin to pay attention to that. And also, we use dominant culture because the default in the United States is also straight or Christian. And so as we are talking about this in terms of diversity, did I jump the gun? I think as we're talking about this in terms of diversity, we want to really pay attention to things that we do and things that we say, and how just in our unconscious things happen.
Yeah.
I think also in the conversation, usually, this can kind of, as you see the picture, I mean, it's somewhat humorous to start out with, and I think it's a non-threatening way for us to get into talking about white privilege, because often there's a defensiveness, especially in white Americans, about white privilege, because we feel like we're being shamed or blamed, and what we try to put out there is that it's not even a conscious thing on most of our parts, and maybe not even an active piece, that much of the time we just accept or take for granted entitlements that white Americans have. So we usually then move into Tim talking about what it's like for him to be a black male in this society, what are the labels that he receives, and how is it that So for example, the first time that we went into a mall together shopping as a couple, and the security guards followed Tim around the store, I was angry and appalled because I hadn't had to deal with that in my own life. People don't follow me around the store because of my skin color. And we had to really talk through that, because even in the beginning, my response as a white person was, well, don't they know who he is? He's educated. He's a pastor. He's this. And then I thought, oh, I'm actually being somewhat racist or buying into the white privilege culture, because what I'm saying is, oh, well, Tim's a good black person, but it's not addressing the larger issue that in our culture, white people are considered trustworthy until we prove otherwise.
Yeah.
Black people in our country are considered untrustworthy until they prove otherwise.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Yep. Yeah. Gosh, fascinating. So I moved to the next slide, white culture privilege. Is that what I don't want to jump ahead if you wanted to say more about that.
Yes. And that actually we should add to that white and / dominant culture privilege, and that really is the issue, and we want people to begin to look at how do we begin to address that. I don't know if you saw recently after the recent election, Saturday Night Live did a skit where
Dave Chappelle,
and they were talking about the reactions to the election and how some people are just, especially in white culture, those that were leaning liberal or leaning towards Hillary, were stunned, surprised, appalled to learn that you could have the kind of language and vitriol that we had in the election and still have that person get elected president of the United States. And how in black culture we weren't as surprised. We've dealt with this kind of stuff before and had it be made okay. So it's sort of like an awakening in our culture that what the hope is that people will begin to do now is begin to use their voice and not be silent.
Yes. Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I'm going to have to go and look.
Way. I'm sorry, say that again?
I haven't seen that skit. There's lots of people saying brilliant SNL skit. Thanks for referencing it. So I'll have to go and check that out. We talked a bit before we went live about it's really in our country's hands now to either do what we've always done when we get uncomfortable and when the veil is lifted, to either go back to pretending it's not a thing, or what I think seems to be the only alternative, which is be in the discomfort in order to make it not the rhetoric or the norm any longer.
Right. And I think that's important, is that we have to actually be in the discomfort, and learn how to walk with people that are considered others, the other, and not just in terms of racism, but in all of the isms. How do we walk with those who society has marginalized? How do we walk with those who fear for their lives every day, who deal with some sort of attack or a slander every day as they walk about, just try to do their normal everyday lives?
Yeah. Fascinating, and a deep, a conversation that's so deep, and for many it's a super emotional thing, and people get worried about that. That being vulnerable to own your own piece in any of this is it's hard for people, I think.
Right.
And I think that maybe goes into your next point here about the personal responsibility. So go right ahead.
Okay. Yes, and that's so the how do we begin to change this is exactly where we go next. Is we begin by changing it within ourselves. Sort of Michael Jackson's "Man in the Mirror." How do we begin to take personal responsibility? The only person that can control your actions or inactions is you, and so we do a little exercise where I'm sort of leading in head, shoulders, knees, and toes, and I'm pointing at the wrong body parts and watching people follow me as I do it wrong. And then we talk about, well, why did you do that? And they say, well, because we were following you, rather than because I made a mistake. So we like to find somebody to blame.
Yeah.
Rather than say, I made a mistake and I'm going to try to fix that mistake. So that's, we try to keep it, our workshop, so that people can stay engaged and learn from it in the process as they go. But it really is important that we step out of our sort of comfort zones and begin to challenge. When we see things that we know aren't right, do we say somebody else is going to take care of that? Do we step up? When we hear racist or sexist jokes, or do we stop that kind of thing, or do we join in, or do we just stay silent to it in hopes that the person won't say it again, even though it makes us feel uncomfortable? Do we even realize that it's happening?
Yeah.
Or has it become just so much a part of our language that we just go ahead and say and do all sorts of stuff? For a while the kids were using, "Oh, that's so gay,"
Yeah.
and they didn't even think about what they were saying or what that actually means. So we begin now to move people to taking responsibility for your own actions and your own behaviors, because that's how we begin to change it.
Yeah. We're going to open it up for questions in just a minute here, but I hope it's okay that I share this. In our conversation last night, you mentioned that you'd be willing to share your resources of the workshop, and that we'd be able to possibly post them on Martin's list.
Yes.
Yes.
Cool. So anyway, just wanted to let people know that they've been kind and generous enough to share this wonderful workshop with the network. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything that you'd like?
Just before we go to questions.
Yeah.
One of the things that where we also go towards the end of the workshop is that as Christians, we are called by Christ to care for the stranger. And so we usually use the text from Luke of the Good Samaritan and read through it, and then talk about who is the neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
And how everybody that we encounter and everybody that we meet is our neighbor. So that we look at it also, we add, when we're doing it in Christian circles, the biblical standpoint and the Christ calling.
Yeah. The other text that I feel like we used in your workshop was when the people were asking Jesus, which do we pay taxes to Caesar? Is that, or did I add that to this over the years?
You did, but it sounds very interesting.
Okay.
But it sounds wonderful.
Well, just in this piece of like Jesus. Sorry, I totally must have made that in my own. Oh my goodness. Well, maybe just goes to show you that I love it and use it often. So the conversation being that people are trying to catch Jesus in a lie, or in, standing up for the thing that they think he's going to stand up for. And really, he's catching them in their own narcissism and their own questioning. Okay, totally a conversation for another day, but never mind.
But we like it.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so go ahead.
But I do think, though, part of our call is, going back to the Gospels and reading, trying to look at the lens of what is God's kingdom. What are the kingdom values that we're supposed to be living out? Not what we want to think they are, but what Jesus actually modeled and said, and how do we make those relevant in our lives today?
Yeah. I am just, as I'm thinking, it was a conversation I was having about echo chambers with our kids. And so, okay, sorry. All right, we've got a bunch of questions, so keep them coming and we'll get to them as we're able. John wonders, How do you handle a conversation with people who say that white privilege is a myth?
You show them that picture that we just put up, and explain to them that it's actually not a myth. It's the reality that that white is the default color in the United States. And you know, if you go into a toy store, you look around, and when you see the dolls, mostly, unless it's very specific to a specific character, it's usually white. So we start that at a very early age of training people that. So you just have to point out that, you know, you're not going to make them believe that it's not a myth, but you point out that the reality is that it's not a myth.
Yeah, thank you. This is not a question, but Jason says, hi, Tim and Sharon. Jason Reed from the New Jersey Synod. Thanks for the star and decades of leadership that you've given to the church. So, little shout out from Jason. All right, next question comes from Paul. For those not able to speak truth to someone enacting these isms, how can people best stand with victims in the moment and afterwards?
Ask the question again.
Oh, shoot. I deleted it. I'm trying to keep on top of the questions. Could you repeat that again?
For those who can't speak truth.
Here it is. For those who are not able to speak truth to someone enacting these isms, how can people best stand with victims in the moment and afterwards? Thank you, Paul. So sorry about that.
Okay.
So I guess the question for me would be having, as Tim was talking about, each of us kind of starting with ourselves and doing self-reflection and doing it in a way that's non-judgmental and non-shaming. So I would want to explore with that person what it is that is the barrier, and looking at some of the issues from within first. Because there's a lot of stuff, you know, we hear people in the media say racist comments, and then they go, oh, that wasn't really me. Like, that's not in me. I don't know where that came from. Yeah. Well, yeah, it is within us all. Mm-hmm. And how do we look at that in a way that doesn't condemn ourselves, but actually wants to we want to grow and give ourselves more information rather than shaming.
And I would say to work hard at being able to give voice to truth in that situation. That's part of the stepping out of our comfort zone, is that if we're not able to speak truth then that untruth gets more energy that's in it because nobody's standing up to it. So find a way to begin to speak that truth, even if it's uncomfortable in a setting. And also, as you stand with those, literally stand with those that are being oppressed. Cross the picket line, cross to the other side, and be a presence there, so that people don't feel as if, you know, this is happening and everybody around here is just standing and watching and nobody's assisting.
Yeah. Interesting. This kind of goes along those lines. Lisa's wondering, does the workshop allow time for practicing how to respond to these isms? I find that a way I'm taken aback by what is said, that I can't think fast enough to respond and come up with a response only later. I need practice. How can I find a way to practice? That's a question on all of our minds right now, is how. Okay. Yeah, how.
I'd say that the best way to begin is to sit down and do it. And one of the things that we have done, depending on the time of our workshops, is we sort of give them a chance to come up with, okay, what are the next steps? What are the ways forward? Because if all we do is talk about it, right, then 30 years from now, we're going to be still having the same conversation. And we said that 30 years ago, and here we are still having the same conversation. So actually, in your group, sit down and come up with here are some ways forward. Here are some steps And you know, you have to start with small steps, attainable steps, make them smart goals, so that you actually put something concretely down that you are actually going to begin to do.
You can also use, usually most of the time we've done the workshop in an hour or 2 hours, so there's not a lot that we can do, but we have expanded it to weekend, you know, an entire weekend. And then at times we have used role-playing in some scenarios where we actually do get a chance to practice.
Right.
And it's like any other, you know, like learning active listening skills. You have to practice those things. So I would say, yeah, take that time to do that and allow yourself to make mistakes and to stumble through it.
Yeah. I think we have several questions. Are you okay staying a couple minutes later so we can attend to some of these?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, cool. I was just thinking about, you know, given the things that have gone on in our country the last couple weeks, so much about, you mentioned the active listening piece, but we don't even know what that means anymore because we're so in a soundbite world right now where we can throw out or throw up maybe what we think or, you know, quote unquote feel, believe kind of stuff on Facebook, and then we have to, there's no consequence or reaction, you know, until, you know, maybe there's a comment section that, you know, blows up, but that people don't have to be accountable for what they say. In fact,
Right.
you can say anything you want to get where you would like to be in life.
Correct. Correct. So you want to do concrete things like work with, be intentional about being in places and in spaces with the other. Take your kids and go to a mosque. Take your kids and engage with a black church or a Spanish church. And so that they are finding a way to actively encounter someone different than themselves and begin to change their understandings and how they do it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, Jason is wondering if there are resources or helps for groups to continue the needed ongoing discussion of racism beyond your workshop, especially around white privilege.
Oh yes, there are a lot of resources that are out there. The ELCA does have a multicultural desk, and they have some isms workshops there as well.
All right.
I would connect with someone from Women of the ELCA. I'm sure they usually have really good resources. Not just for, you know, racism, but also for how to deal with women in our society when they are marginalized.
And some of the old stuff, some of the old school stuff is still really relevant. I mean, I learned some of these pieces from Dodie Mathias back in the early 80s, and she wrote about dismantling racism back then. So not just the most recent things, but there's a lot of good core stuff out there.
All right. Paul is wondering, will the full workshop be presented at the E? It's not in the current list, Paul, but anybody on the learning team, if you're listening, this might be a wise addition. I don't know if you're available, Tim and Sharon, the last weekend in January, but somebody might be in contact with you. I hear Louisville's a nice place that time of year. Thanks, Paul. We'll let you know if something changes. Paul Amlin says that Judithi Roberts here at Churchwide is a great resource person. So thank you, Paul. Lots of echoes of this would be important at the E. So thank you. I think we're going to take time for just one more question, and I think it's of utmost importance. So I've saved it for last. From your perspective, have you seen signs of hope through this work that you do?
Yes. when I did this just last week, I had a gentleman come to me after the workshop, and he said that the thing with the Band-Aids and the nasal strips, he said it was so powerful for him because he had never even thought about the fact that that existed in the world. For him, it never made any sense, the discussion around white privilege, and he was able to see something there in a different way than he had ever experienced it or seen it before. And that was helpful for him to begin to start thinking differently. So yes, I've seen some really concrete signs of, when the light goes on and people get it.
Sharon, how about for you?
I think for me it's the same feeling I have in being a pastor and in an ongoing ministry in 20 years, is that there are times when I say, why am I doing this? There's times when I say I just would like to go and sit behind a computer and not deal with people and work 9 to 5. And every time I get to that place of disappointment, God gives me something, and I call it Holy Spirit timing, that there's this glimpse of the kingdom, and there's a sense of hope that makes me be re-energized and recharged and say, this is why I'm doing this, and that I trust that love wins in the end, and I trust that God is working something bigger, and that it's important for me to be a part of that, and that somehow my one encounter with someone may ripple effect in a way that we'll never know. That's what gives me hope.
Wow, thank you. I think maybe one final thought I'm hopeful that you can share is we're all sort of, the people who are listening here are obviously intrigued, and the many questions that have come in and the ones I haven't passed along are help. We need help having this conversation, because it can't continue down this path any longer. And so do you have some words of wisdom for those who are listening who are in the trenches, trying to be prophetic voices in these kids' lives and family and congregational lives? What's at stake, and what's next?
Wow.
I know it's small.
What's at stake is that if we don't begin the process of taking some forward steps, then as people get more emboldened to be racist and sexist and homophobic and xenophobic and all those, as people feel more energized to be able to do that, what's at stake is that we run the risk of just sort of tearing each other apart. So what's next is that we begin to change the conversation, and we begin to find a way from within our churches, from within our homes, from within our own selves, to begin to really work at changing the conversation and getting into relationship, because that's where I think it all comes down to, is relationships. Mm-hmm. And getting to relationship with others, people that we may not have thought we could have had anything in common with, and really just crossing the line. One thing I sometimes tell people to do is, before you can make a statement against another, I want you to learn enough about that person to be able to argue their side of the argument. Mm-hmm. Because once you start to engage and you start to learn, it begins to change your perspective.
Yeah. Sort of the practice of Martin Luther's description of the 8th commandment: speak about your neighbor in the kindest way. Be able to say something, speak about their actions or their whatever. Anyway, interesting practice. Right. We don't do very often. Sharon, anything else you want to speak into that?
I just, Tim's always pointing out that, you know, when Christians, when we see Christians in the media, often it's believers talking, you know, believers in Christ talking about what they're against. And if we can help our young people to articulate what we believe in and what we stand for, and these kingdom values of love and mercy and forgiveness and acceptance, to really focus on how we have a positive approach to move forward as God's people in the world, and not what we're against as much.
Yeah.
Micah 6:8.
Thank you so much, you two, for the work that you do and for being prophetic voice in this time of chaos. We'll make the workshop resources available on Martin's List in the coming days. And as always, this will be archived for your use later on. A couple of things before we close out. The Extravaganza 2017 is January 19th to the 23rd. Registration is open, and it is we have great numbers, so we hope that you'll join us for the great network get-together. And as I mentioned, all of our Third Tuesday conversations are archived at elcaymnet.org/3tcarchive. And again, just a huge thank you for the work that you do and for being with us today, Tim and Sharon. We hope that you have...
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting us.
Yes, we hope that you have a great...
And we hope that folks found it helpful.
Yes, we got lots of thank yous in the comment box, so there we go. It's good. It's good to be together and good to lean into this subject together. So thanks again, and we hope that you have a great day.
God's blessings.
Thanks.